Future is an artist who makes music. I used to not like that music. Now I really love that music. It's some of my favorite music. There's a poster with Future on my wall, so clearly I like him a lot. And I decided today I was going to count down my personal picks for the top 25 Future songs. Now, I've already played around with doing discography rankings for artists, and I plan to still do more of those in the future, including at some point in my lifetime I'd like to do one of them for Future, but I feel like at this point there's no point in doing it because he's probably going to release another 5 albums in the next 7 to 8 years, if you know what I mean. But I do love making these list type videos, and I thought that a way that I could cover more artists that I wanted to was just to talk about songs instead of albums. Very original idea, I know, I'm just way too creative, that's just how it is. Either way, I'm excited to get into my picks here, but before those, I'm just gonna play a bunch of honorable mentions, because making this list, I started off with like 100 songs that were in genuine contention, because when you have a discography as big as Future's, and in my opinion, as consistent as Future's, you have a lot of amazing songs, and it's really hard to pull out just 25, so I have way more honorable mentions than I'd even like to have, but I just couldn't cut any of these. I tried to cut as many as possible, but I needed to give all these at least a shout out.
Diamonds on me dancing. Diamonds on me dancing. Diamonds on me. Bought my bitch a brand new rolling and she still ain't happy. Got that Cartier with diamonds and I'm laughing at you. 911 turbo boys cause I'm a super trapper.
Low at your neck, already at night. Me and Pluto, astronauts. Alien, I'm not a regular guy. I'm a million, put you that regular fly. It's been a year since I went in the mall. I'm not a regular. Gone in the sky over 20,000. I keep my Wi-Fi lit. I spend over 5,000. That's just so unfit. I'm not going back no more when they ain't have shit. Get your Gucci on sight, yeah. Rollers on ice, yeah. Get first class flights, yeah. You riding like a bike, yeah. Get a brand new. Yeah, 60 seconds I'm gone, Nicholas Cage, nigga. Yeah, I'm in the film, I'm the one with the stars. If you ride with me, gotta take a charge. I appreciate you niggas, I appreciate you bitches for keeping me relevant. Talk all you want, brag all I want. How can I not make you niggas regret? How can I not go and give me a check? How can you? I'm on the top floor, young niggas stand down. I'm in cocky, treat a good girl like she ran down. Yeah, catch an attitude, I'm gonna fuck your friend. That yellow Lambo outside, but when I trapped in the sun, that green Ferrari sitting outside when I couldn't make fun. I gave the plug to my nigga, I gave the game to my son. Grinding when stashed them rolling. I caught a plane like a blind man. I fought that bitch in them Steve man. Hitching the rock like a tie-tie. Mixing the soda like. I'ma set out for the Brody. You beat a body, get a rolling. We don't entertain no police. I'm certified with my Doty. They will kids hell by Wody. Got a big scale for the Doty. Top down in the winter time for the temperature. We got it heated, now we undefeated. Coming so conceited, but I really need it. 8 figures, big tippers. Come slide. Where your ass was at, dog, when I was served loud. Where your ass was at, dog, when niggas wasn't feed. Where your ass was at, dog, when bitches didn't eat. 20 bricks, I have a nigga twitching. Let's say you wanna conquer automata tomorrow. Diamond VVS and Niagara Falls. Crazy drinking, fall asleep in the boat. Keep the stanker, nigga. Money coming in, tell me what's the program? 25 bags of kush, yeah, get with the program. Shorty want that way, get the program.
And now to get into the actual list itself, starting off at number 25.
You range, you done dipped them in vodka. Talking a million, pussy, I got her. Came out the trapper hood, nigga, role model. Pulled in the back with the truck in the front. Smoking on gas, 2.5 in the blunt.
This song starts off with a hazy, swirling synth and a deep, droning bass line that together immerse you in the really cloudy atmosphere of the track. And after he pulls us in like that, Southside hits us with a really icy, piano-led trap beat that Future just sounds so confident and controlled over, giving us a very lengthy and yet extremely catchy chorus. And verses where he's doing some fairly standard luxury flexing, but he does have some memorable bars in here, and I also like some of the more serious content mixed in, where he basically reminds us that it wasn't easy for him to get to this place to have all this stuff. Lines like, money and power, it got me on meds, load up my rifle, I don't go to bed. I don't think it's a song that would turn a doubter into a Future fan, but I just feel like this is stereotypical Future at its best.
At the same damn time, hold the soap, private bottle. At the same damn time, I'm in fierce with the set, going crazy. Got some damage.
From the triumphant horns to the explosive drums to Future's super bombastic and energetic and over-the-top performance, to the sort of lo-fi homemade sound, to those weird descending melodies that Future throws in at the end of some of his lines. For me, when you put all that stuff together, you get a banger that just perfectly encapsulates the 2010-2011 Dat Piff mixtape era of trap music. And if you're someone like me who grew up during that era and have nostalgia for it, or if you're just someone who looks back on it and appreciates it in retrospect, then I think this song should be a prime example of what was special about it.
Bright light shining all bright on the bandit. With the Cadillac, panoramic, no panties. Old school Chevy 55 granddaddy. Gotta throw some salt on the cause you know I'm getting at it. Throw the fall.
I feel like this track has one of the most beautifully composed beats that Future has ever rapped over. It just has this sparkling quality to it, like neon lights flooding a city at nighttime. The chord progression evokes such a sense of seriousness and just provides a very emotional tone for the track, which is fitting for the content on here, where Future is talking about how easy it is for people from places like where he's from to just end up dead at any moment, die very young, tragically, really just creating an environment where you can never feel safe. Lines like, know a few real ones ain't gonna see their next birthday, and we better hear about this shit on the news or something, are just pretty tragic, especially that main refrain, because it just highlights the fact that so many of the people that die this way, you just never hear about it. It never gets coverage. It just happens so often that, like, they almost just get forgotten, and it's just extremely sad. And it's just pretty fucked up that we live in a world where some lives are considered way less worthy than others. There's also a really lush, soaring guitar solo that comes in at the end of the track, and it's really just the perfect way to cap things off.
Watching this shit, watch it walk in the club, watch how crazy it gets, watch this, hey watch this, hey watch this, watch this, hey watch this.
I'm not the biggest fan of Future's earliest mixtapes. In my opinions, he really started to find his footing around Monster. But the reason for that isn't that he wasn't making good music before Monster. I just feel like projects like Dirty Sprite or 1000 or Streets Callin', they have a lot of great songs. They're just too long and inconsistent and filled with a lot of filler, so when listening to them as entire projects, they just don't really hold up. But I still think they're worth visiting just to pull out great songs like this that do have a unique sound compared to what Future later became, because Future does not sound like this anymore, really. This finds him on a very bouncy, swaggerish, Gucci Mane type Atlanta trap beat that just feels like something you want to throw on in the car on a really hot summer day where you're just speeding down the highway at like 150 kilometers per hour. Yes, I am Canadian. And I really love what Future does on here with his melodies and vocal layering. It's not a style of vocal performance that I've ever heard from him pretty much since this era. It captures a very distinct and cool feeling to me. I love how it carries over the track. It just provides so much swagger, even more than the song would already have. And the vocal layering makes every note have this weirdly blissful feeling to it, even if Future isn't the best, like, traditional singer. So this is probably my favorite track from any early Future mixtape, and it's my go-to whenever I'm in the mood for that sound.
While I'm on recline, I know the homies, my brothers, my cousins, they gon' ride for me. I know Tiara and Brittany and Keisha, they gon' lie for me.
With this track, I feel like we start to dip into the weirder side of Future, the ATLian side, as I like to call it, just because he was affiliated with Dungeon Family back in the day and is still very close with Andre and some of those guys. Because the beat on this song sounds kind of strange with this pool of really syrupy synth notes that all just bleed into each other, making it feel like Future on this song is just swimming his way through an infinity pool filled with lean. And vocaling, he's delivering this super impassioned singing, but the inflections that he puts on his voice are just so bizarre. It almost feels like he's crying as he's singing. Who gon' lie for me? Like, I can't even replicate it, because Future just has this thing with his voice where it's almost like he has natural auto-tune on top of it. Because I've said this before in past videos, but people talk as if Future uses auto-tune on every single song, and he does use it fairly often, but I think he uses it a lot less than a lot of people think, because if you really listen on a lot of tracks, he doesn't have any vocal effects on his voice. He just has this really weird, gargly, entrancing voice naturally, and the way he uses it on tracks like this, I think, is just super creative and fantastic. By the way, I'm pretty sure that this particular track does actually have a bit of auto-tune on it, but what I'm trying to say is that what's interesting about how Future uses his voice, it doesn't come from the auto-tune, it just comes from his voice himself. All the auto-tune does on a track like this is just pitch his voice properly. The weird qualities are just still coming from however he mangles his voice.
Damn, been fucking my brother. Damn, back gripping that ooze. I for that dick cause she bougie. I for that hoe cause she choose. Sip out my cup and some.
This song is filled with more spite and anger than most songs that I've ever heard in my entire life. Coming right after his breakup with Sierra, it almost feels like Future went into the booth just in a blind rage, and I've never heard someone sound more venomous and just evil on a song. It just exudes from his voice, and the beat is also super monstrous and almost scary. Like, the song almost has a kind of terrifying feel to it, but in a very commanding and controlled way that just leads to an all-out banger that is full of self-aware toxicity. It's just Future giving in 100% to his vices as his way of coping with his heartbreak.
Tony Martin,
much about this song that shouldn't work or that is technically bad, whether it be the weirdly lo-fi sound that sounds even more lo-fi than any of his earliest mixtapes. Like, genuinely, the recording quality of this at points just sounds like fucking ass, and I don't understand how that happened. Future's hook is repetitive as hell. The beat sounds like most other trap songs that were being released at this time. His lyrics are nothing to write home about. His flow is just alright, and yet, despite all of this, I fucking love this song. Now, I am not a person who really is that into so bad it's good art. You know, I love The Room, hilarious movie. Other than that, don't really care for it. I fucking hate Lil Pump. You couldn't pay me to listen to that Corey Feldman album. It's just a style of art consumption that I've never been into. So what I'm trying to get at here is that I don't love this song just because I think it's so terrible that it ends up being entertaining. It's more so that I feel like ignorance is a really underappreciated tool in music, and this song just uses ignorance to its fullest extent. I don't give a fuck that the chorus is repetitive as hell, because the way that Future even says Tony Montana, to me is just so damn character filled, and it's just so fucking entertaining, and immediately just gets me vibing with the song. Then once he has me locked in, I start hearing that piano line, and it just feels so irresistible and catchy, just so earwormish. The drums go hard, the song has such a nice bounce and groove to it, it's so easy to just have fun with. And Future's kind of over the top, almost yelled delivery on here just adds the perfect level of energy to the song. It's not so over the top and hype like a song like Groupies where I just want to fucking mosh out to it and just bash my head against the wall. It still carries a nice slick swaggering groove, but still slaps and goes pretty hard. You know, I think there is a very much needed place for music like this, because sometimes I just want to throw on some super ignorant shit and not think, because the world is a super fucked up place, not only within your own life, but you just look around at the world at what's happening in places like Palestine, Yemen, Myanmar, or even just more broad global issues like poverty, lack of healthcare, lack of food. There's just so much fucking dumb, terrible shit in this world. It's really hard to log onto the internet without seeing at least one thing where it's just like, wow, our world is fucking shit. And you really don't want to turn a blind eye to that stuff at all times, because obviously it's important to fight against it. But I also don't feel like it's healthy for your own mental health to only be focusing on shit like that. And sometimes when I'm just in a mood where I really can't get my mind off that type of stuff, I love putting on music like this that just totally takes me away, makes my head fucking empty, and I'm just jumping around, not giving a shit about anything. And I think there's a lot of people out there who would act like that's what all Future's music is, you know, none of it is anything to actually think about. I fully disagree. I feel like most Future's music makes me think, and in fact makes me think about some of the issues I was just talking about, you know, poverty in the United States, systemic racism, gentrification, the trap of growing up in really poor areas with a lot of violence. Like, he talks about super serious shit all the time, and I find he makes me think about it in new lights, and he talks about other shit too. But all I'm trying to say is that I know there's a lot of people out there who just like to see Future as this mindless guy saying whatever bullshit, and the only people who like his music are people who only like the beats, only like how he sounds on them. I disagree. I think for a lot of Future's music, the lyrics definitely play a huge factor in my enjoyment. But here, with this song, this is a prime example of just pure ignorance, and I live for it. The iridescently spacey beat on here has such a rich atmosphere that I can never get over anytime I listen to this song. I also fucking love those sparkly, icy notes that play starting during the verse. It's extremely gorgeously produced. I really like Future's delivery on top of it. He sounds quite vulnerable. And this song also features one of my favorite Future lyrics when he says, "I look inside your eyes, I see the same things I'm going through." I just find that to be very poetic and touching.
You'll never ever get your bitch back. You'll never ever get your bitch back. Lamborghini dog, but I left style. Let her fuck around, got a nigga pissed off. Nice little thought, got stiff on.
One of the biggest things that helped me come around on Future's music and made me start appreciating him so much as a performer is that when I started to like a few songs from him, just here or there, when I would sing along to them, I really started to realize just how weirdly and creatively and counterintuitively that he performs on songs. When you get a song like Draco and you just listen to how he sings on there, like if you try to mimic his exact cadences, his exact flows, his exact vocal inflections, that man is doing some crazy ass shit on here that I've just never heard anyone rap or sound like this on a track. And the craziest thing about this song to me is that he switches up his flow like 8 or 9 times, and pretty much every single flow he hits us with is some new weird shit that I'm just like, I've never heard it. And I just find it so damn entertaining the way he carries himself on this track. It also sounds fantastic that it's done over one of the weirdest beats he's ever rapped on too, with that strange cycling melody. The whole thing just has a really odd vibe. I remember back in the day when this song was kind of popular, I was just so confused. I was like, this song just sounds like shit. Like, it doesn't even sound like a good basic trap song. It just sounds weird and stupid. But, you know, then I matured, I grew up, and, you know, Future's for grown folks only. None of you little kids kids, I'm just fucking around now. I don't know what I'm saying. All I'm trying to get at is that I really didn't fully comprehend just how great of a performer Future was, because what he's doing is so different that I guess at first it just sounded bad to me, but then when you really try and do it yourself, it's like, oh god, this actually takes quite a level of skill and talent and refining, and just the natural vocal chops that Future has that allows him to sound as strange as this on songs like this. But just the flows on here, even the flows, like even if you take away his vocal inflections, the way he's fucking rapping on here, it's just weird as fuck, and I appreciate it so much.
I respect my elders, that's why I might treat you like I'm careless. So crack to a pregnant lady, forgive me for the crack, baby. If I open up my...
This is maybe the most confessional, humble, and vulnerable song that Future has ever released. Not only serving as an apology to his ex-fiancée Sierra, but pretty much just anyone that he has ever wronged in his life, or just anything that he has held guilt over, like that line where he says, sold crack to a pregnant lady, forgive me for the crack baby. It's a 7-minute song of him ironing out his demons over a fairly melancholic beat, but he retains your attention for the entire 7 minutes, just given how many times he changes his flow and delivery. He still keeps things interesting the entire time.
My team, man, I'm cut up a ring, man. Fully loaded magazine, shout out to the game, man. I can't even speak. I've been already geek for 7 days. Put that wood on that batch.
Just like with Draco, I find this song super entertaining, just given how Future is using his voice and how many different flows and deliveries and cadences he uses. The difference between them is Draco is a lot more melodic and Future is playing around with a lot of more strange melodies on Draco, whereas here he's working more so just with the eccentric, elasticy stuff that he's doing with his voice, especially in the second half of the track on the second verse. Just the way he slides in and out of so many different pockets and flows. I just find it so entertaining to try and perform along to that part exactly like how Future does it. I can never fucking get it, but you know what? I'm almost there.
Some dope in the cup, go and order the truck, cause the Bentley is coming. The end of my sleeve is on plain Jane. Sipping codeine on the plane, man. Most of my niggas, they gang, man. Switching my skin on.
The beat on this song is one of the most epic and hard sounding things I have ever heard. That vocal sample and the way it just floods and rises is so operatic and grand, and it just creates this sea of motion that Future just floats through perfectly. This song is just, it just fully encompasses you. It's so blissful and so amazing to get lost in.
Yeah, my line on all my money exchanging. I gave her so much money, she got my ex still claiming me. I ordered a jet because I hope she trying to frame me. I'ma keep it.
This song opens up with a really beautiful melodic section. Went and baptized my wrist in VV, yes is no. Yeah, and it's just like super pretty. The instrumental's very cascading, very polished. But then about halfway through the song, you hear an instrumental that sounds a little familiar, and you realize that it's the Slave Master sample from DS2. So you start thinking, hold on, what's about to happen here? What's about to happen next? And then you just get blasted in the face with one of the hardest beat switches that I heard all last decade, and Future just comes in, and you just have to get so fucking hyped to it because it's just so irresistible, and then you just play the song back like 30 times in a row. Sometimes you only play back the fucking beat switch over and over again because it's just the craziest shit you've ever heard, and it makes you go wild as fuck.
Don't tell me you sell a bin to the moolah. I just went rid the ruler with the jeweler. I just went sell the paying like a gooner. I put diving niggas straight out the sewer. Like a loaded chopper, I'm about to shoot.
A song like this is very contextually important for why I love Future's music as much as I do, and it highlights something that I think a lot of people who don't like him miss about his music, and actually kind of about trap music in general, because you always have those people who say, oh, trap music is just about drugs, money, women, street shit, gangs, luxury items, money, all that stuff, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of people will claim that these artists are glorifying those things, you know, they're being a bad influence. But what they miss is that this is just reality for millions of people who are growing up in poverty, growing up in rough environments, growing up in places where the only successful people you see are drug dealers. They're just rapping about real life shit, and just because sometimes they do it uncritically, it doesn't mean that they're glorifying it. You can't expect all these rappers in every song to have a fucking PSA announcement that, oh, hey, by the way, like, drugs aren't all good, and actually, I'm quite addicted to it, and I struggle with it myself, you know? They really don't owe that to anybody, so even if on a song like Fuck Up Some Commas, they're just talking about drugs and shit like that, talking about doing them and not saying they're bad, it doesn't mean that they're fucking glorifying them, because they have plenty of songs like this where they're saying, yeah, I'm fucking addicted to drugs, and I use them to cover up for the fucking haunting shit that I've gone through in my past, the demons that I still deal with. And because people think that rappers are just flexing the fact that they do drugs instead of just, speaking on their real life experiences, they miss a lot of the pain and sadness that's found even in the more upbeat songs in this genre. But that's why I feel like a song like Codeine Crazy is so important, because it's spells it out more explicitly for people like that. Like, once you hear a song like this and then go back and listen to the rest of Future's discography with this framing in mind, I think it might illuminate you a little more as to why people like me actually consider him to be a worthy lyricist who actually really often hits home with some really harrowing, even relatable, and just real shit lyrics. This song here is definitely one of his best for it though. The washed out production just lulls you into this really hypnotic state. It also sounds very melancholic, and then on top of that, Future often on this song sounds sadder than I've ever heard him, so it just really puts you in that depressive state of mind. But he also often changes his delivery up on this song a few times to sound more amped up, but he almost sounds just fed up and frustrated with the shit that he's having to deal with. So it comes out being this weird yet effective mix of being really depressing but also a banger at the same time. And then there's plenty of quotables on here. Too many days gone by, sitting by the phone, waiting till I reply, drying my eyes, believe it or not. And I love the believe it or not addition there, because a lot of guys in his position, a lot of trap artists would never admit that they cry, because in that type of culture, it's just seen as soft, it's not seen as something that you do. Lines like that just show Future at his most vulnerable, along with bars like drowning in activist suicide and fuck the fame, I'm sipping lean while I'm driving, all this cash and I ain't got nowhere to hide it, I'm an addict and I can't even hide it. Just all these admissions, all these confessions that he's making on here, they just cut really deep, especially if you're someone who maybe has been an addict themselves and can relate to this type of content. So I personally think this song is extremely powerful. I know there's a lot of people in the world who would never see it that way, but that's the beautiful thing about art, and I never complain about it because it's just near and dear to me personally, and that's all that really matters.
Snail, you can smell all type of cushion in the air. Fly the man and you're moving them bells. You keeping that paper, it's out on your trail. Shit in the laser, yeah, fish in the blazer, yeah, looks like a glazer.
The reason why I love this song so much is that it is 2.5 minutes long, and in those 2.5 minutes, it is just so fucking relentless. There's not a second of silence or stalling or even a pause. As soon as you hit play, Future comes in, I got the tool and I walk in the door, got some head and a coop and it off in the nose. Coming in with that really choppy, bouncy flow that immediately gets me into the groove of the song. And then in the span of those 2.5 minutes, he ends up fitting in 4 verses, including one from Lil Keed, multiple choruses, even a pre-chorus. And what that does for the song is just make it feel so relentless and like it's constantly throwing new things at you, and you just don't have time to process it all until you listen to it a bunch of times. Because the other thing is, he's switching his flow and delivery up numerous times throughout every verse, and Lil Keed is sounding different as well, adding his own flair and distinct sound to the song. And it's one of those tracks, like, you know how some songs have moments where that's the one moment that you look forward to the entire time? Undefeated is one of those where every single moment is one of those moments. Like, every single one is one I cherish because it just sounds so unique and kooky and zany and off the wall, and it's just so hard for me not to just have a massive grin on my face as I'm bouncing around listening to Future perform these really weird vocal acrobatics on top of this strangely textured beat where as soon as you're done with the chorus, boom, the verse comes in. As soon as you're done with that, boom, the pre-chorus comes in, boom, chorus, and it just keeps hitting you, hitting you, hitting you. And that structure just works so incredibly well for me. I can't really think of another song off the top of my head that does something similar to that, and yeah, I just love this song for that reason.
What I go through behind I can see you was giving up, that would kill me the most. Came out the sewer stinking, go in a booth and I'm blanking. Slept with my...
To start off the top 10, we have one of the most beautiful songs that Future has ever made, both content-wise and production-wise, and actually vocally as well, because his vocal performance on this track just hits you right in the soul. The lavish, elegant piano-led beat from Zaytoven is just gorgeous. The piano line especially, like, it is so not repetitive. I don't know what other way to phrase it, but it's just so long and extended, and by the time it loops, it's like you barely even realize it because it just feels like it keeps progressing. And lyrically, as the title implies, he is talking about his days being broke, but he takes it to another level and makes it a lot more interesting, in my opinion, by framing it through the lens of a lover of his who he is showing extreme admiration and respect for, given the fact that she did not leave him even when he was broke. She stuck by him even through those hard times, because that's when you know it's real. That's when you know someone actually believes in you and isn't just using you for anything. That's the level of love and respect that I think a lot of us are looking for and the standard that we want to hold ourselves to. This is one of Future's songs where I feel like even if it's not personally up your alley or doesn't really connect with your taste, I feel like you have to at least respect it.
On good drink, on good drink, on good drink. Money long, get money long, get the yellow diamonds like honeycomb. Riding low like an essay, get doped up, that's every day.
This is another song that I feel like really served as a turning point for Future's music for me, because when I heard this album back in 2016, when I heard this song, I just thought it was lazy as fuck, because all I heard was that main, fairly repetitive acoustic line and some trap drums. That's all my brain would hear. One thing I've realized is that a lot of trap that I used to accuse of being surface level, it really wasn't. It was just me being a surface level listener, because there's actually a lot more going on in this song that I was just oblivious to, because I was just focusing on the surface level aspects that to me sounded like derivative trap. So I never really tried to listen deeper or give consideration to the other elements of this track that make it more special in my opinion. Unfortunately, I don't really know if I have the proper term to describe some of the sounds I'm hearing in the background of this song, but there are just so many little colorful flourishes and details that when I hear them now just feel like little bubbles of color fizzing up through the track, and also add different grooves and rhythms that I can get locked into. One of the things that I like about this song is that, you know, every time I listen to it, I can kind of groove to it a different way because there's a lot of intricate rhythmic stuff going on. And it just has this really lush, deep, rich sound that I find so intoxicating. Future's rapping on it is very relentless, makes the song very energetic. The melodies that he weaves into his performance are great, and that's another thing that when I was talking about how part of the reason that I came to appreciate Future was singing along to his songs, a lot of the man's work with melody is super underrated, and I know I'm not the only one who thinks this because I've seen people online say it before. I was talking to my friend John yesterday and we were talking about this, but he just adds these sneaky melodies that you don't even catch at first, but then when you're singing along you start to notice where he's placing certain notes and how it just creates this really fluid motion along with his flow, and it just makes you realize that Future songs actually have way more moving parts than a lot of people give them credit for. It's just, I guess they're not paying attention to the same things that I am at that point, and I have no hate towards those people because obviously I've admitted many times in this video that I used to be at that point, but I'm just personally glad that I was able to get to a point where now I realize that with not all hip-hop music are you looking for the same things. You know, I barely even consider trap a subgenre of hip-hop anymore. I consider it more of an evolution, its own entire genre, because when I listen to hip-hop, I'm not listening for the same things that I listen to when I'm listening to a trap album. And for that reason, I barely even find them comparable. Like when I make a top rappers list, I almost feel like I have to separate out trap rappers and regular rappers. Not that a lot of trap rappers don't have plenty of technical skill, but again, there's just so much more. Because I mean, when you're listening to Nas isn't trying to do weird shit with his voice, but nowadays, if you're not trying different vocal inflections and different ways of delivery, you may as well not even be in trap music.
Real shooters, they'll sit in jail for me. Kill the judge, nigga, before they tell on me. And fuck the plug, nigga, I'm trying to take something.
I'm gonna be honest, this is the one song on the list where straight up, I have no idea how to explain why I love this song as much as I do, why it's my second most played Future song of all time. I guess a big part of it would definitely be the production, especially those layers of what sound like swirling, syrupy synths that just form this cloud that feels like it's just rising and falling in the mix. It almost makes me think of just the cloud from the cover of DS2 of what it sounds like, and I just find it so damn intoxicating. It just like takes me to a new world every time I hear it. Like for me, it's definitely one of the easiest Future songs to get lost in. It's one that I might just like put on replay and just listen to it over and over again just because I love being lost in that world. I love the subtle melodic work that he does on here, just like I was talking about with the last track. But also, and I almost hate to say this, I almost feel bad saying this, I kind of love the lyrics on this song. And I don't know, I know a lot of people would see them and think they're just disgustingly misogynistic and just, you know, kind of treating women like objects. And I can't speak to Future's intentions here, but what I've always thought when I heard songs like this is, to me, it's not about being misogynistic. To me, it's just about the fact that Future is a fucking freak, man. And that's not something that's just unique to men. You know, I feel like freak culture, or whatever you want to call it, I just totally made that up, but that probably sounds stupid as hell, but you know what I'm talking about anyways. But freak culture is a real thing that exists amongst both men and women, and that's why I feel like Future has a lot of female fans as well. That's why you have comments like this on the YouTube video for it, because shit, it can go both ways. I've always found there to be something very evilishly entertaining about very effectively done hedonistic music, and I feel like Future is one of the best people out there at making hedonistic music, mainly for the fact that when he does it, he sells it so damn well, and also he has songs like Sorry or Codeine, Crazy or Solo or plenty of others that kind of balance it out and show you that he does have a more humble side and that he is very self-aware about all this stuff. Like, he's not ignorant to how he comes across. He is very clear on what he's doing on here, and I just personally think it works out really well.
You turn that on. You pressing the itch and you pushing the gas, you making them violate. I drive on the top on the far and I zig in the zag, I'm all on the grass. I deal with that hand to pass.
Right from the moment that you hear those wonderfully textured, really mysterious sounding synth notes open up the song, you just know you're in for a gem of a Future track. Whenever he hops on beats this psychedelic and trippy sounding, I feel like is when he's almost always at his best. I mean, he of course has a lot of variety throughout his discography, including some of songs that are ahead of this one. So this is far from me thinking that this is the only sound that he's good at, but in my opinion, I think at the end of the day, this is the sound that I always have enjoyed from Future the most and still do now. And the second verse of this track, I think, is one of my favorite verses that Future has ever kicked, just based on flow and delivery alone, the way the verse progresses. Basically, as the verse progresses, his melodies get higher and higher, his voice gets more and more amped up and eccentric, and he starts getting louder and more aggressive, and the combination of those three things just make the entire progression of the verse feel so satisfying when it comes to its conclusion. The drums on this track are great, they're super crisp. He has some funnier lines, like when he says, "We don't know what we'd be saying, we just be yelling out bonjour," but then also some more serious content, like when he says, "I did what I had to do, I ran in that bitch and I didn't have a mask, I did what I should have did, survived through the trenches and look like a man."
Me leaving bruises. I don't fantasize, I make movies. I don't tell lies, I tell oozes. I get idolized by these groups. I treat them just like they regular.
Mask Off is a great track, but this song here is the flute-led Future song that I feel like steals the show on that album. I feel like this is one of the best and most brutal and vivid street songs that I've heard, not only in trap, but just in hip-hop in general. He does such a good job with it. I especially love that part about halfway through where you get that skit of like the police officers breaking in and screaming, "Get on the ground," and then you hear those gunshots, and then the track comes back in, and then Future just comes back in sounding really emotional with, "The feds did a sweep, pick the dogs up like an infant, got 13 bodies. Got 27 damn victims. Burn the eyes out of witness. Put your hood on shitless." Man, that whole part, holy fuck, every time is just like, fuck. Yeah, man, he just went hard with that. I don't know, it just kind of hits me in the gut, especially that burning eyes out of a witness line, because shit, I fucking believe it. I mean, even if Future didn't do it himself, I believe that the people he's around have done that to someone. And the framing of this song is really haunting too, because it's illustrating what would have happened to Future if he didn't find success in the rap game, and highlighting the fact that it is so hard to break out of these environments, and one of the only ways to do it is to become a rapper, which is just so rare to actually make it that there's almost no hope for people in situations like this, because if he hadn't blown up, if he was still hanging with these same people, he could have got locked up too. He could have been one of the dogs they picked up like an infant, you know what I mean? He would have been right there with them still. You know, when he says, "Cartiers, I got privilege, see the way my dog's living," he knows just how privileged he is to be where he is when a lot of the people he came up with are still back home, still struggling with the same shit.
Yeah, I just fuck your bitch and some Gucci flip-flops. I just had some bitches and I made them look like I just took a.
This song, I feel like, is already one of the most legendary trap songs of all time. I already know there are so many people out there, including myself, who will never forget the first time they put on DS2 and heard this shit. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing. I was a little 14-year-old kid. I was out in my backyard painting my fence as a little summer job. My dad was just paying me like 50 bucks to paint our backyard. And on one of the days that I went out to do it was the day that DS2 dropped. And one thing that you should know about me, because I've said a lot of times that I used to not like Future at all, I have always been a big fan of DS2, because the one thing that I have always been able to appreciate about Future's music is just how well he's able to simulate that really druggy, trippy, psychedelic feeling within his music, pretty much like no other person I've ever heard. So when you pressed play on this song and you just heard that dark, menacing, mysterious beat just slowly creep in, slowly get louder and louder, you hear Future shaking up his cup, getting ready to come in, it just keeps building and building and building, and then out of nowhere you hear dirty soda, Sprite, Lee, white, Pura, iced tea, fully loaded, AP. And then, "I just fucked your bitch in some Gucci flip-flop." Like, that shit immediately had me fucking dying, but at the same time, I was like, holy shit, this is so goddamn dope. And honestly, this song is just even better to me now after watching the Wizard documentary that came out last year, when I think Metro Boomin was talking about what this song was like, and he said how Future just came in the booth after being at like some girl's house or something, and he was like, "Bro, I really just fucked a girl in my Gucci flip-flops," and he just goes and makes a fucking song about it. Like, just hearing that story from Metro and realizing that this is actually some shit that Future actually did, that he's rapping about, it just makes all his music even more believable, honestly. It just makes one of the most legendary lines in trap music history even more legendary. But of course, there's more to this song than that. The verses are really fantastic. Future goes in. I still can't fucking rap along to them, don't know all the words. And straight up, I feel like this is the best song he's ever made in terms of simulating that really druggy, psychedelic feeling. Like, I've never heard a song that is just as intoxicating as this one, and that almost just numbs your brain like sipping on a cup of lean.
Dirty soda and styrofoam. Spill the day to get my mind blown. Dress it up and go to Nassau. 200 miles on the dash. Gotta roll a pound up.
This is potentially the best beat that Future has ever rapped over. It is so damn rich and spacey sounding. Honestly, every synth on here sounds like it's just made out of diamonds. It's so colossal and futuristic sounding. It makes me feel like I'm in a club that's located on a spaceship that's just flying through space while everybody on it parties. Future comes through with one of the most iconic and legendary choruses of last decade, and lyrically, well, for the most part, he is doing his usual luxury flexing. There's a few bars on here relating to police brutality, including one on the chorus, and I guess some people could look at it as just a really lazy way of highlighting the issue, just throwing a few random lines into a track that otherwise doesn't delve deeper into the subject matter. But in my opinion, Future's not a guy who you want to come out here making this song exploring race relations in America and police brutality on a deeper level. I mean, you leave that stuff for people like No Name or Milo or Open Mike Eagle or people like that, but to expect that from Future in the first place, I think is stupid. But I think the way he weaves it into a song like this is actually really effective for a couple reasons. First of all, this song became an absolute anthem, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that when you have have people in the club chanting every lyric to this. It just reminds everyone around you about the issues going on in the world. You know, you could have been in a club back in 2015 and this shit would have been playing and you're having all this fun, just drinking out with your friends, not a care in the world. And a lyric like this, when you're chanting it, it probably reminds you that, hey, I am in my own bubble right now. And it's good to be reminded that even though I may be living in a comfortable situation, there's a lot of people out here that are still struggling and facing injustices that we still have to be vocal about and that we still have to try and end. So I think the fact that this song just prominently shines a spotlight on police brutality, even if it doesn't say much about it, I think it was really effective, and honestly, I don't think this song would have been quite as big as it was without that.
I'm about to push me some weight. You gon' catch me in the gym. I'm about to fuck up some moolah. But you ain't gon' owe me no check. I don't care if you and my daddy. What? Bitch, I'ma cut off your neck.
To me, this song is banger luxury trap just done to perfection. The beat with that kind of Asianish guitar sample, I'm not sure what it is. It is quite repetitive, but holy fuck, the bass is massive. It has such a propelling momentum to it. There's not a single second of this song where I don't feel like I'm raging. Also, whatever that Asian guitar main instrumental loop is just gives the song a really unique feel and sound. And Future on here, he just sounds so hungry. He sounds like an absolute don, like someone you wouldn't want to mess with. There's nothing too complex about his flow on here, but just the way that he's rapping, it feels so unrelenting. It feels like he's always in your face. His internal rhyming on a chorus is paired with a flow that emphasizes those syllables in a way that creates a really cool groove. There's a lot of seamless flow switches within the verses that keep things really engaging. I let her go in the Saks, Fifth Avenue, run up some laps. Sometimes I go to Chanel and I sit in that bitch like it's a trap. Rolex throw my bando, Mo George Butch with the ammo. I spit the ammo indo, put it on an 18-wheeler, dripping the rapid finesse. I go beyond for the skrilla, dripping the ice of the chest. I don't know for the dealer. Added it all up on the iPad, talked to the plug on the call phone, went to Miami to read up Rovers, Porsches. Yeah, anyway. And even though none of the bars on this track really feel that clever or that creative, and they all feel pretty typical for this style of trap music, there's still a lot of lines that, while they're simple, I find pretty memorable, and I do think they're good flexes, like when he says, my chains, they fight for attention, my neck, it'll get a little rowdy. I let her go into Saks Fifth Avenue, run up some laps. Sometimes I go to Chanel and I sit in that bitch like it's a trap. I don't know why, but I always fucking love that part. You look at a line like, add it all up on the iPad, talk to the plug on a call phone. I mean, yes, that's just typical drug dealing stuff, but it's the little details, like the fact that you're calculating on an iPad instead of a little $10 calculator, the fact that you're using a car phone instead of, you know, a $70 cheap reusable flip phone. Those are just subtle ways of trying to indicate that even when he was selling drugs, he was so successful that he was able to provide a more high-end life for himself. He wasn't just some low-level drug dealer. He was really more at the top of the chain. So when it comes to this brand of rap that is pretty much just pure flexing, pure ego, I don't really think it gets any better than this. So if this is a style of music that you can enjoy when done well, I just think that this song is the pinnacle of it.
I blow a bag today. I don't do nothing for games. I ran it up with the same niggas, get the money and stay with the same niggas. I know that money can change, nigga, they don't look at.
This track definitely has a very engrossing, syrupy, banging beat courtesy of a truly elite trio of producers, Metro Boomin, Southside, and Sunny Digital. But what has always made this one of my favorite Future songs is 100% Future himself, both his lyrics and delivery. And I personally feel like the lyrics on this track have never been fully appreciated, even by most Future fans. Like when I go in the comment sections on YouTube for this or the comment section in Genius, there's no one really talking about this song in the same way that I personally hear it. Because sure, he keeps repeating that frame that he's blowing a bag today, whether that be a bag of cash or a bag of weed. But either way, it's clearly said to highlight his lifestyle that is just full of excess, full of having no responsibilities pretty much to anyone other than himself. And again, to someone on the outside, this may just seem very shallow, like, oh, he's just talking about spending a bunch of money, like what the fuck is deep at all about this song? But in my opinion, this song is about a lot more than just blowing a bag. It's really Future revealing that he uses this excessive lifestyle, this very rich, lavish, luxury lifestyle to cover up for all the things that have hurt him in the past. What is my evidence for this? Well, there's lyrics like, I know I came from poverty, I got my name from poverty, I sold the crack on my avenue, only the strong survive, I'm just enjoying my life. Bars like that clearly show you that part of the reason Future has the lifestyle that he has is because he came from nothing, so now that he has shit, I mean, he's making the most of it. But the part about using that lifestyle to cover up trauma, I feel like that's made evident with the part on this song where Future starts listing off some of his loved ones who have passed away, saying, if my granddad was living, I know he'd be proud of me, I know for sure if Snoop was living, I know he'd be proud of me, I know for sure if Lonzo was living, he never would doubted me. And I really do not do that part justice, because what is truly so special about it and what just hits me every time is the fact that as Future is saying those lines, he gets progressively more and more just defeated and sad sounding as he goes on. Like when he's talking about his granddad, for the first line, he keeps kind of the same tone he had before dipping into this section, but then by the time he gets to Lonzo, he literally just sounds so quiet and hurt. It seems very clearly intentionally done, and then maybe most interesting interesting of all is that after the Lonzo line, he goes back in saying, I know for sure, so if it's your first time listening to the song, you just assume he's about to continue listing more people in his life that have died, but instead he says, I live with these diamonds, just check out my clarity, and as he says it, his tone becomes a lot more confident. He goes back to that same super unflinching and hard exterior Future that we're used to, and so it just makes me feel like he's directly covering up or trying to forget about the pain from these losses with things like diamonds, because literally, as he's progressing down this path of talking about his dead friends and getting more and more defeated, what's the one thing that brings him back to sounding like what we see as his usual self? It's him talking about his jewelry as if he does it directly to take his mind off of what he was just thinking about. So I think this is one of the most telling songs in Future's discography. His flow on this song is also fantastic, especially in the second verse. It just feels super rapid and honestly hard to follow. That verse in particular I think is definitely one of Future's best technical displays, at least on DS2. He gives us a few strange vocal inflections, and the way that he dips in and out of them is pretty cool. Like, he'll be rapping and then he'll progressively get more and more weird sounding till he hits a point that he stays consistent at, but basically this song just gives me everything I love about Future done extremely insanely well, and also has one of my personal favorite moments from his entire discography, which is that part about him talking about his dead relatives.
It's gonna be okay, okay, oh, it's gonna be okay. Man, how nigga, we gon' play with you, gon' be okay. I want no relation.
I remember when this mixtape came out, and at that time my impression of Future was solely based on the album Honest, and I thought he was just an absolutely terrible garbage pop rapper who just had no redeeming qualities about him and just made really derivative shit. But this tape was getting talked about a lot at the time, so I went and tried it out anyways, and the first few tracks, you know, Radical, the title track, didn't really do that much for me. Didn't think they sounded terrible, but I was still kind of definitely looking at things through the lens of a Future hater. But when the project got to this song, I will never forget just how blown my mind was that Future, this guy who I just painted as a dumb, generic trap rapper, had made a concept song. And it was probably the first time in my life that my ignorant suburb-raised ass actually ever considered the fact that, hey, maybe trap rappers aren't just stupid fucking, you know, drug addicts talking about money all the time. Maybe they're actually just normal people who are also great musicians and are actually kind of clever and can make smartly written songs when they want to, and the fact that they don't do it for every single song isn't because they don't have the ability to, it's just because that's just not the style of music they make. So in that sense, this song is special to me because it kind of opened my eyes about this style of music in general. And even though now I view Future in general in an entirely different light, this is still the song that when I hear it, I just feel like is undeniably the best thing that he's ever done. The first half of this song feels so effectively toxic. It just feels like it's oozing this black poisonous liquid, not only from Future's voice, but from the instrumental as well. And speaking of Future's voice, I don't know what it is, but there's just something about his delivery on here that just feels so twisted. He feels like that monster depicted on the cover. He warps and twists it so much to the point where he does really just feel like some evil, hideous creature with zero care for how his actions affect other people. Also, the melody that he has here, I don't know how he simultaneously sounds so evil and twisted, but also really smooth and catchy at the same time. We gon' drink like a 6 miles. Like, I always love trying to fucking imitate the way he sings on this song because to me it's just crazy as fuck. And this sound and feeling that he crafts matches the lyrics perfectly, where he's basically being as toxic and ruthless and low-key misogynistic as you've ever heard him. Literally comparing this girl he's hooking up with to a pistol because she's just a throwaway, she's disposable, he doesn't give a fuck about her, he just wants her for her facial. And if that sounds like a completely disgusting attitude to you, then Future did his job 100% correctly, because as I said, this track, it just feels disgusting, even from the music, just how he's presenting himself, how blackened the instrumental is, how forcefully he's performing. He's just being as hyperbolic as possible to show us this monstrous side within him. But then of course the famous catch to this song is that right after that we get a beat switch, and all of a sudden the track starts feeling a lot lighter, the darkness goes away, and instead you just feel this hazy gray cloud kind of washing over the track. The melodies on this part of the beat just sound really remorseful and sad. It's a lot more melancholic and moody feeling. And on this half of the song, Future flips the script. Instead of being the guy who is just hooking up with these girls, seeing them only as objects, he's putting himself in the position of now this girl is going off and just having sex with other dudes, viewing them in the same way, and how that actually feels to be on the receiving end of it. At the start of this half, Future is still holding on to some of his bitterness, trying to pretend like he doesn't care that much. It's like, oh, you're going to sleep with these other guys because you don't care about me. Well, guess what? You know, I don't care either. You go and do that. But then in the second verse on this half, he basically admits that he actually has feelings for this girl, and being treated this way does not make him feel good. And you can hear it in his voice too, because he gets progressively more and more high-pitched and numb sounding at the same time. It's a really really cool effect it has as he's getting more and more confessional and open and basically just admitting that yes, this does hurt, this is a shitty way to treat somebody. I just feel like he executes this concept perfectly. It's almost a Jekyll and Hyde type of thing where each half of the song represents a different half of him, and both beats suit what that half is supposed to represent so perfectly. On both sides, Future is rapping and performing differently, and he uses the most out of his different deliveries to really emphasize the emotions that he's displaying here. And then just on the writing side of things, this song is just so fucking self-aware and almost meta, especially in the grand scheme of Future's discography, that it just makes me have a lot more respect for him, and honestly, it almost makes me more comfortable listening to his music in general, because he definitely does have tracks in his discography that if you heard them on their own, you'd be like, this is kind of just like straight up misogynistic, but I feel like once you've contextualized all his music put together, I feel like he constantly shows how self-aware he is of his image. And of course, if that type of personality is just not something you enjoy anyways, I understand, but you know, it's the same as how Megan Thee Stallion raps the same way about guys, just, you know, the gender roles are reversed. To me, that style of music isn't necessarily demeaning. Sex is just one of the most popular and common vices out there, and I don't think that every time a rapper talks about sex or wants to be sexual on a track, they should have to approach it with kid gloves, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of times they're just coming in, they're just being blunt and freaky as possible, so it's nice to have a song like Throwaway, even putting aside how incredibly it's executed. It's just nice to have this song here to really show and prove that Future is aware of how his attitude often comes off on songs, and how he does acknowledge that being on the other side of that obviously can feel like shit, especially if you actually have feelings for the person who's treating you that way. And one final thing about this song is that I really like how it's framed to feel like Future getting a taste of his own medicine rather than him putting the blame on the woman that he's hooking up with. I mean, if anything, he makes it sound like she's only doing that because of how he treats him, and he's just sowing the repercussions to his actions. So with all that being said, those are my top 25 personal favorite Future songs. I would love to see what you guys thought of this list, whether you disagree with any of the placements on here, whether there were some songs I forgot about that you would have had on your own list. In fact, if you want to, just drop your own list down in the comments below. I will definitely be having a look at them. But either way, thank you guys as always for watching, and I will see you next time.